Let's talk about the stages of playtesting. There are several stages in playtesting, and the first four, which are all before release of the game, can be going on at once, but tend to start in the order that I list them here. The first is testing in your mind's eye. This usually happens before you even make a playable prototype, but it can happen afterwards. So as you conceive the game, picture it in your mind, play it in your mind. Think about specific situations in the game and ask yourself, what is the player going to do? Is this going to work? Will it work the way I thought? If you play through the steps, you might find out that no, it won't work the way you originally thought. And the result is you'll save a lot of time and make the initial solo playtesting much less messy because you anticipated some of the problems and eliminated them before you made a playable prototype. Or if you find some really big problems, you might decide not to make a playable prototype and go on to something else. Remember the motto, fail fast. If you're going to fail, find out as soon as possible that it's a failure so you can go on to something else. Then we have solo testing. This is by the designer, and if it's a video game, by the other people who are developing the game. It's often neglected by tabletop designers, especially if they design a game for more than one player. They sort of think, how can I play two players? Well, you can do it. You can do it pretty easily if you really want to, and you'll save yourself a lot of problems by solo playtesting. Every game that you make, when it's in its initial prototype, playable prototype, is going to be screwed up. It's just about inevitable. It's like the first draft of a novel. Nobody sells first drafts of novels. Isaac Asimov on a dare once sold a first draft of a story, but he was Isaac Asimov. He was a famous writer. He'd written 300 books. That's an exception. And that was only a short story, not a novel. So work on improving the first draft yourself before you inflict it on other people. You'll find your playtesters more willing if they play games that aren't fairly obviously broken as soon as they start to play them. Then the next step, which is beta testing, is playing with other people or having other people play the game. I prefer not to play the game because I think it skews the results. Sometimes the other players think, oh, he's a designer, he's going to win, and then they don't behave properly. Or they feel, oh, he's a designer, let's gang up on him. But one way or another, it skews the results. It's easy for me not to play because I design the games for other people, not for myself. If you are designing the game essentially for yourself, you might find that a bit hard not to play. The designer and developers during this stage of testing where other people are playing the game should stay hands-off. They can observe, but they shouldn't intervene. They certainly shouldn't say things like, that's not the way it should be played, or point out errors that the players are making. Let them play the game and see what happens. And then recognize that what people say and what they do are two different things. So it's really important that you watch what they do. At some point you want blind testing. This is relatively easy with a video game because you give the video game to somebody else and they play. They don't have to read the rules because video games are designed so you don't have to read rules. The developers, designers are nowhere to be seen, and then they get a report afterward. If you have the facilities, you can be behind a one-way mirror, and so you can watch and the players don't know that you're watching, but that's unusual. For tabletop games, getting blind testers is very difficult because people have to read the rules. People are reluctant to read the rules of commercially published games, let alone of prototypes. And then the blind tester has to report what happened, which is also a burden. So blind testing is pretty difficult for tabletop games. Then we have what I'm calling gamma testing, which is testing after the game is released. And of course, whenever people play a game, they're testing it. So you release the game, people have it, they play it, those results can affect your further activity, whether it's a reissue of the game later, a sequel, an expansion, a patch to fix a problem. Nowadays, there are many free-to-play games, and often they are issued when they're not really done, with the intention that the test results will enable them to change the game to improve it. And if the game does very poorly initially and not very many people play it, then they can stop and no more effort is expended on that game and they can go to the next game.